1 in 9 American adults is on a GLP-1 medication right now. 2 years ago, it was 1 in 33. That's tripled. And I'll tell you straight from what I see every single week that more than half of them are doing things wrong. And it's not the medication. It's the part around it, the part that nobody really built a plan for. Half my client roster is in one of these right now. So I'm not reading about this, I'm watching it happen in real time. On real people every single week. And the ones who succeed all do the same handful of things. So I put together the entire guide of what I've seen working for these people. How the dose changes your math, how to find your actual calorie baseline, how to set your caloric floors, how to understand your protein requirements, how to protect your muscle you're quietly losing right now. And the one that nobody talks about is like what happens when you actually stop. This is literally how you keep your results with or without the medication. Start to finish, I'm laying it all out in this video. If you're new here, welcome back to my channel. My name is Andres. I'm a registered dietitian. I hold a master's in exercise science and sports nutrition, and I have been coaching clients for over 12 years with my company, Planos Nutrition. The landscape in weight loss right now has shifted a lot. And now with the GLP-1 drugs being the most effective weight loss drug ever created, I had to step up to make sure that I was teaching people about the habits and nutrition strategies to ensure that what they were doing was effective, and this did not become just another fad. This video is all about that. So let's get right into it. Here's the mistake I'm seeing. It's almost always the same one. People let the drug do the work and they do none of it themselves. The scale moves very, very fast, so it feels like it's working, and it is working. The number is going down, but 3 months in, they're noticing different things like flabby skin, low energy. Some people are losing hair. Some people look kind of sickly depending on what they were doing and what their dose was, and so many other things. And though the weight loss is still helping them in so many other ways, this is not the most effective and smart a strategy for weight loss. Here's the thing, that's not the medication failing. The medication literally guarantees weight loss for over 90% of people that do it. This is actually what happens when you take away someone's appetite and just give them absolutely no instructions, because that's what the drugs actually do. They slow how fast your stomach empties. They act on the appetite centers of your brain, and the food noise gets quiet. That's it. That's literally the entire mechanism. There's other things underneath it that are still not well understood, but for the most part, that's actually how weight loss happens. It doesn't necessarily teach you what to eat. It doesn't build a single habit in here, but it does remove the resistance that a lot of times is always created to be able to build an adequate calorie deficit, which is a requirement for weight loss. And that becomes the opportunity for all of you guys watching this video, because for the first time, eating the right way is not a fight that you have to win. The window is the most valuable thing this medication gives you, and most people spend it doing absolutely nothing, just injecting themselves once a week. My goal with this video was to build a guide to hopefully help you do this the right way. And I build it into 4 steps that I'm gonna call them RSVP. Instead of V as in Victor, it's gonna be B as in boy. So RSVP. Step 1, read your baseline. 2, set your floor and targets. This is gonna be in regards to calories and protein. Number 3 is build your day. And number 4 is protect what you don't want to lose. Then the side effects, we're gonna talk a little bit about that, the stalls and plateaus, and what happens when you stop. Before we get into the steps, we gotta understand something very important, which is the dose that changes the math by which you really do a lot of these different things. On your starting dose of a GLP-1 medication, usually, at least for tirzepatide, which is the most common one for weight loss right now, 2.5 milligrams tends to be the start for most people. When people start at that, your hunger is going to feel close to normal. For some people, it's very strong. For others, they barely notice it. So it really depends on the person. But a lot of times as you go up, the appetite suppression and the side effects, a lot of these different things start to climb up. At the top of the range, you will literally have to work to eat enough food. That is not a figure of speech. The drug matters too, because there's different kinds. Semaglutide, for example, which is Ozempic and Wegovy by brand names, they work on one receptor, which is your GLP-1. Tirzepatide, which brand names are Mounjaro and Zepbound, they work on 2, GIP and GLP-1. I've made videos about this in the past. You can go back to my channel and check them out. In practice, Tirzepatide tends to be a harder appetite suppressant. And there's a third one in trials right now, which is called retatrutide, which is a triple agonist. It works on GIP, GLP, and also on something else known as glucagon. I'm not gonna get into the details of that because this drug is not yet approved by FDA. It's not available, but it's coming and it looks much stronger than the other two. And here's the part that you need to really pay attention to. Every time you titrate up, your baseline resets. The dose that you're on today may not be the dose you're gonna be in 6 weeks or maybe 6 months. That depends on your doctor and how they approach your process. But most likely, appetite may drop again. Your intake may drop with it. And the plan you built at a lower dose may stop working in the first place. So this is not something that you set once. You have to reiterate and you have to change every single time the dose increase. You have to run the numbers again. One thing before we go further, I'm a dietitian. I am not going to tell you what doses you should be getting. If you drop comments about that stuff below, I cannot help you with that. Consult with your physician or your PCP or the doctor that you're working with. So let's get into the 4 steps that we just talked about earlier. Step 1, read your baseline. Week 1, you are adjusting. So you don't have to change anything. You don't have to optimize anything. You're literally trying to get through the week, trying to understand what the drug makes you feel like. Week 2, this is exactly what you're going to do. You need to download a tracking app, whether it's Chronometer, MyFitnessPal, Lose It, whatever you decide to use. I personally like Chronometer, and you're gonna track what you're eating. And you're gonna do this for 7 days. In the tracking process, you're not really gonna establish any goals. You're not gonna really be reaching for any numbers. You're not really trying to eat better. Maybe you will because you're in it. The point is, like, you're not necessarily dieting this week. You are taking a reading, awareness, understanding what is actually happening. Because I can't tell you what to fix until I know where you actually are, and neither can you. Most people are genuinely shocked by what comes back when they do this. They're eating 500 calories, 800 calories, 40, 30, 20 grams of protein, some days even less. And that explains a lot. It explains why the scale is dropping so fast when you only have like 30 pounds to lose. And most likely also why maybe your energy at some point starts to tank. Is it working? Of course it is. Is it sustainable? Not even close. But people really get excited about this. And at the end of the day, I don't celebrate fast weight loss because fast weight loss is never sustainable weight loss. You can't set a caloric floor, which we'll talk about what it is, until you know how far you've already fallen. After you collected enough information, you understand what your average calorie intake is, which leads to step number 2, which is setting your caloric floors. What floors? You probably are asking yourself. It's literally going to be the lowest you should be going when it comes down to calories. Usually in weight loss, we typically tend to focus not on the floor, but on the ceiling. What is the total amount of calories that you should not go over? But the problem is that on GLP-1s and the people on these journeys, that changes because you are struggling to get enough food. So you're in need to set a floor, which is the bare minimum of calories you should be aiming towards to. Protein floor first, and then a calorie floor is actually set second. That order matters, and I'm gonna show you why. Let's start with protein. The textbook number for protein in fat loss tends to be 0.8 to 1 grams per pound of body weight for the most part. So if you're a 200-pound person, that is going to be anywhere between 160 to 200 grams of protein per day. If you're on a GLP-1, that's not happening. There's no way you're gonna be able to hit those protein targets, particularly if you are in a higher dose of tirzepatide or a GLP-1. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that you're going to be able to. Some people are able to. For the most part of my experience, it's not easy. So we don't use your current weight, we use your goal weight. Say that you are 200 pounds and you want to get to 150. Your target is at 150 grams of protein. Your floor becomes 120, which is 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per goal weight. And here's why that matters, because that target is what you hit on a good day, the higher number. But the floor is what you hit on a bad one. Most people only set a target, and they're not necessarily focusing on a range. So the first bad day feels like you're failing because the whole thing falls apart. A floor doesn't ask you to be perfect. It's just simply asking you to hit a bare minimum. Now let's get into the calories. For most people, I'm setting the caloric floor at their BMR. What the heck is BMR, Coach Andres? It stands for basal metabolic rate. And that is the number that calculators use to determine the amount of calories that are required for basic bodily functions. So just essentially to survive and to exist. For most women, that's usually where the typical 1200 calorie diets come from, because that's usually a caloric floor for most women. Now, that could be higher for many women too. It depends on the person and where you're starting. For men, usually can be anywhere between 1400 to 1500 calories. But I'm not gonna tell you that you need to be hitting these caloric floors arbitrarily, because again, it depends on you. My suggestion, you should probably use a calculator to determine your BMR. We have one in our site, and I'm gonna link it in the description, that you can use for free to get your numbers. But understand what that number is. 1200 calories does not become the goal. It's essentially the floor, the very bare minimum that we need to be aiming towards to. It's the line that you don't want to go under. If you're eating 800 calories or less, if you're eating less than an amount, most likely you're going to be losing weight pretty quickly. But my goal is to actually get you higher. For example, to a 1400 caloric floor with 110, 120 grams of protein. Yes, you will lose weight slightly slower on the scale. You will also keep what actually matters, which we'll talk about that later, but mostly muscle and your metabolic rate. In my GLP-1 coaching program, I actually sometimes do not celebrate fast weight loss. And I would actually increase calories to slow it down. And I've done this before. And this is why we typically monitor things very, very aggressively. Now, you probably are asking yourself, okay, calories, protein, but there's other two macronutrients, right, coach? Yes, carbs and fats. But honestly, I'm not touching them yet. At least not when you're starting this process, because most likely if you're on a GLP-1 drug, that means obviously a lot of things you've done in the past have not worked. So maybe you're not really have a ton of knowledge on this stuff. You gotta get your calories be consistent. You have to get your protein consistent, and everything else becomes a conversation for later. Step number 3, you have to build your day. This is the part of it that we do a little bit of planning on this stage of the conversation. We're going to build your day around the caloric and protein floors that we establish. We're gonna start with what we call 3 protein anchors: morning, midday, and evening. Here's why it has to be spread out. Off the medication, you can undereat in the day and rescue it with a big dinner. That's not ideal, by the way. That's usually what people tend to do, and usually that's what gets them in trouble because they're overeating at night. But in the GLP-1, typically things change a bit. The room isn't really there. You'll get 4 bites in and you're done. The problem with this, and this is why most people are really struggling to get enough calories, is like maybe they were skipping breakfast to begin with before they started the drug, and they were overeating at night. But with their appetite suppressed and their hunger's really shot, at nighttime they're not even eating anything. So you're not eating anything in the day, and you're also not eating anything at night, even the wrong things. So that explains why you're eating 400 to 800 calories on a daily basis. Really, the goal is to get your protein more distributed, roughly 30 to 40 grams in one sitting, 3 times a day. You can also do snacks. I'm not saying you need to be having just 3 meals a day, but in my experience, most people on GLP-1s, they don't necessarily feel like they want to eat very often. So that is going to be something that is going to be unique to you. Now, the first anchor on protein is going to be your breakfast. And early on, I recommend, and this is so important for you guys, a liquid protein option. Why is that important? Because it's going to be a little bit easier to digest. Here's a couple name brands that I recommend you guys to test out. None of these companies are paying me money. They should probably, because I recommend them so often. But there's a yogurt drink called Oikos Pro. Chobani has also one that is like 20 to 30 grams of protein. Oikos Pro has like one that is like 23 grams of protein. A ready to drink shake like Core Power if you want something with milk, or maybe do something like Owen if you prefer something like plant-based. Most of these are gonna have 20 to 25 grams of protein. There's a Core Power version that has 42 grams of protein. And the reason for why liquids are important here is because they go down when food will not. And that's the whole reason for it. And it leaves you room for you to still eat real food with that meal. Maybe you're throwing in some berries or a banana with that. Maybe even combine it with a higher, you can even take that shake. This is something I like to do. You take a shake, one of those shakes like that are super tasty, usually like chocolate or vanilla, and you combine it with like a higher fiber cereal, like Akashi or 1 Degree Organics. Those are really great brands I highly suggest and recommend. I've had clients who couldn't face a plate before noon, and they typically are hitting a pretty good amount of protein by just following these things. Now, anchor 2 and 3 become your lunch and your dinner, and it's like trying to pick proteins that are going to sit a little bit lighter in your stomach. I usually go for like a white fish, like a tilapia or something like that. Chicken thighs, mostly because it has a little bit of fat to help you really get enough calories in. Maybe you're doing some eggs, ground beef with some fat in it. Something also that you would enjoy. I would probably skip the dried chicken breast, like that sits in your stomach for 3 hours, and honestly, you don't even enjoy having it. It's not that it's bad food, it's just like you just won't finish it. Now we move on to that another important component, which is going to be your fiber. Fiber is important, but In my opinion, it's second, not first. Why? Protein and fiber both together drive fullness. This is great when you are not on a GLP-1 medication. It's a problem when your appetite is already gone. So you cannot max out on both. So protein needs to win on here. And we get the fiber whenever it's possible and it's a little bit easier to do. For example, you get some berries. You can blend them into a smoothie so you're drinking it instead of chewing it. Or vegetables. You can do like a green smoothie or something like that that is going to make it a little bit easier to digest. Here's some other example of ways that you can get some extra fiber. You can do chia seeds and throw them into some yogurt. You can also do all kinds of berries, so usually are going to be a little bit lighter in the stomach. You can do vegetables that are going to be not as cruciferous and as rough, like broccoli or cauliflower, but maybe you do something like green beans or asparagus, or even blending spinach into smoothies and things like that. I'm a big fan in people who are struggling to get enough calories that they do dates. It's a great way to get something sweet, but also at the same time something with fiber added. So it's really, really great to be able to also add that. Nuts and seeds and nut butters are great. So those are a list of items or options that you can try out. Now, 2 more things before we finish on this chapter. Space your meals wide enough that a little hunger has a chance to show up. Don't eat on top of being full already. It never works and it makes you feel worse. And keep 3 to 4 proteins on rotation so you don't necessarily get tired of the same things, because aversions are a real thing when you are on GLP-1 drugs, specifically if you're feeling nauseated. What you loved in one specific month maybe is something completely different than the next one. So if you build your whole plan on just one food, you're going to feel like you're stuck. And then we get into the last step, which is protect what you don't want to lose. And this leads to step 4. If you take one thing from this entire video, take this one. A real chunk of what you're losing or you may be losing on your GLP-1 may not be just fat. It may be lean tissue or muscle. And if you're not taking care of what we just talked about up until this point, this is definitely something that could happen. This is usually the case in any type of aggressive calorie deficit, and it happens more when intake is this low and your protein is this hard to hit. Here's why you should care. It's not about how you look. Muscle is metabolically expensive. It's a big part of what holds your metabolic rate up. For every pound that you lose, you're lowering the number of calories you burn doing nothing. You're making your body cheaper to run, in other words, which means that when you eventually come off the medication, and you will, which most people typically want to do that, you come off with a lower baseline than what you started with. You are right now literally building your own regain in the future if you don't do things right, and the scale is congratulating you all the way through that process. So how do you stop this? Protein alone doesn't just do it. Protein gives your body the raw material, but it doesn't give it a reason to keep the tissue. The way to do this is by loading those muscles, essentially doing resistance training. You have to start to incorporate 2 to 3 sessions a week. That's all you need to do. It doesn't have to be something complicated or something that you're killing yourself. You just need to have some stimulation on your muscles, and you don't have to go to failure on everything. You just have to give the body a reason to hold on to what it has. That is the single highest leverage thing in this entire video. Protein plus lifting weights. Everything else is just about optimizing what you're eating and building habits that is going to last beyond just what you're actually doing. Now, getting into the supplement piece, which is actually the other protective part of this process, which is protecting your deficiencies or avoiding them. And I want to be clear about what they do. They fill gaps. They don't replace any of what I just said. A solid multivitamin is a must. A 1 a day is usually all you need. There's another one by Pure Encapsulations. You're eating half of the food that you're used to, so you're going to fall short on micronutrients most likely. This covers you. Vitamin D, if you're not getting real sun exposure, that's another big one. But I would get your levels tested first because I don't want you guessing at a dose. Now, granted, if you go to a doctor, typically you're going to do some labs at least at a good clinic that they should be prescribing this the right way. You're probably going to be doing some blood work prior to it that's going to give you a bit of an idea of where your nutrition stands or where your nutrients are at this point. The last one I'll typically add is a protein powder. It's technically considered a supplement. It's essentially a tool that gets you to the floor, pretty much, the protein floor we talked about. And the last thing is, again, get your labs if you haven't done that, particularly B12, iron, ferritin, and vitamin D. These are the typical ones that we tend to look at in aggressive weight loss. Deficiencies or low intake don't just announce themselves. They typically just show up on things like fatigue, and you feel weird and some stuff is happening. Maybe you're getting sick more often. Now let's talk a little bit about the side effects to kind of move on to a different section, because this is where most people typically tend to quit or feel like they just don't feel making this commitment for a long term. Usually it's nausea and constipation, reflux, sometimes like some people experience the sulfur burps, it's really what they call them. These drugs slow gastric emptying, so food sits longer in your stomach. And big meals, particularly high fat meals, sit in your stomach that is already moving pretty slowly. So on your worst days, I would try to focus on smaller portions and make sure you're not eating something very heavy on fat. That's usually something that helps most people. The second thing, stop eating at the first sign of full, not comfortably full. The first signs, if you eat to the point where you would normally stop, you have already gone too far. And the reason that, again, is because of that gastric emptying that is lower. If you have constipation, I would try to focus on fluid first, then fiber. Then maybe if you need to, you can actually get on a magnesium supplement. Now that's a little bit more advanced, and I would consult with somebody like a dietitian like myself or a doctor before you take something on your own. Fiber without enough fluid makes constipation worse, which is actually why I recommend you actually focus on water intake first, because fluid generally, you need to drink a lot more than what you think, and less food coming in means less water and less sodium coming in with it too. And it's honestly very difficult for you to be able to also get water, because it's part of the things that you just don't maybe feel like you want to do in that moment. And the last piece is know your worst day. For most people, it's the 24 to 48 hours after injection, particularly at the beginning stages, particularly when you're actually bumping up doses. That's when a lot of these different things can start to peak. I wouldn't fight it, plan your day around it, and put your easiest meals there, particularly the liquid proteins, simple food, things like that you may be able to tolerate. The last section of today's video is going to be focused on plateaus and stalling. Whenever like at some point the scale stops moving. That happens often. And the first instinct for a lot of people is like, oh my God, I'm not losing weight. I need to ask my doctor for a higher dose. I see this so often. Don't just yet. And sometimes doctors will immediately do this because they're not necessarily handling the nutrition of their patients. I would run the check first. I would do this first. Are you eating more than what you were? Be honest, because a lot of times appetite may get readjusted as you adapt to the dose. It's supposed to. And intake may start to creep up a little bit, especially if you're not tracking or looking at what you're having. A little bit more here, a little bit there. And most stalls that I typically see are not the medication failing. Their intake is just essentially drifting off without really realizing it. So you retrack. If you're not tracking in the first place, you do another 7 days to figure out exactly what's happening. Same thing you did in step 1, without any targets, just the reading that you're gonna be seeing in there. Now you have data to be able to look at this, and then you can decide. And one more thing about stalls, stop grading yourself on the scale alone. I have clients so many times who don't see a change on the scale, but then they see changes in their waist and how their clothes are fitting and compliments that they're getting from people. Take waist measurements, take pictures to understand your progressions, like what you're lifting in the gym, your energy, your laps. Those 4 things can tell you whether or not you're losing fat or whether or not you're losing yourself in this process. The scale cannot tell the difference sometimes. It just can't report a number. Now, the last piece I'm going to talk about is what happens when you stop. Now, this is the thing that nobody wants to talk about very often, because nobody wants to stay on these forever. A lot of people don't, right? The cost, the side effects, insurance, life, injecting this like once a week. So the real question was never how much you lose, is how much you actually keep. And the data here is not very, very promising. People who come off of GLP-1 without having built anything underneath it usually regain most of that weight that they lost, usually within about a year. I want to be careful on how I say this next part. This is not necessarily that you lack willpower. It's not that people are weak. It's just the drug was just doing what it's supposed to do. Take the drug away and there's nothing underneath it. Obviously, there's nothing left to be able to hang on to. The appetite comes back, and what do you do with appetite? Well, you're going to go back to the same life that you actually had before, and then that becomes a problem. Now, compare that to people who actually keep it. They have a floor that they hit on bad days. They have 3 anchors that they don't necessarily think about anymore. They have a lift schedule, or they have something they started to build an exercise routine that helps them really manage that. And they know exactly what their food actually looks like because they measure it instead of just guessing what they're having or not even knowing anything. None of that stuff came from the medication. The medication was just a vehicle that made this process easier to build. That's the window that I was talking about at the start. You don't have to be more disciplined or kick yourself harder than you did. At the end of the day, you don't necessarily need something fancy. You just need to build a system that still runs when the medication goes away. So there you have it, guys. The RSVP process that I established with a lot of my GLP-1 clients and my GLP-1 patients. Now, read your baseline on this, understand exactly where you're starting, set the floors, particularly for the calories and the protein, and build a day. That's really the whole idea behind this. Now, let me finish off this video by telling you this. I highly recommend and suggest that you get help around this. Why? Because otherwise, if you don't know how to build this thing, you're going to struggle in the future. I promise, because I've seen it so many times. The reason why we created a blueprint program with a specific focus on GLP-1 clients or GLP-1 people is so that they understand how to do this, because the weight loss is literally guaranteed. What we need to build is the process to allow you to be able to lose the weight, but also keep that weight off afterwards. That's what every diet typically promises, but none of them actually are able to deliver. My job is to help you build everything everything underneath, the foundation of this process, while the drug do its work. If you're interested in learning exactly how I do this with a lot of people that I've supported over the years, make sure that you check out the description. There's a link in there to book a call with me on my team. We'll get on a strategy conversation to figure it out. What dose are you in? When are you starting? When are you stopping? And then essentially build a plan around that. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoy this type of video, make sure you hit like, subscribe, leave a comment if you have questions. We'd love to be able to support you and help you in any type of way. And until then, we'll see you guys on the next video.